Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today it's not necessarily a role-playing game, but I get to build a big cool robot, and building is something that we love to do on this channel. So you're going to be seeing some Armored Core 6. This is going to be a pretty popular video game for everybody right now, but honestly, if you are anything like me, you love giant robots, and you'll want to see plenty of this as it is. I'm going to share with you the build that I have been using to get to the game so far, and I think it's really simple, really, at least, casually approachable, and it makes a lot of what makes Armored Core difficult a lot more manageable. So, I do want to lay out a couple things real quick just to preface this build. I'm going through 3 missions and 2 really big bosses for this build in Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is where a lot of the big filters for this game are, and they really funnel out some more casual players who may just be looking for some fun mech action to enjoy. That being said, this build should be approachable by everybody, and the reason that we're doing the Strider mission right now is not necessarily because it's difficult, but it's to show you that even though this build has a smaller generator and smaller boost capacity, it is definitely still mobile enough to dodge and survive the bigger hits. The good news is that it is actually a heavy frame AC, so you can ultimately outfit it with bigger arms if you want to for some additional AP for more survivability. Being that it's a heavy frame biped, we can take a couple hits and we get to retain a decent chunk of mobility. It's no reverse leg, obviously, for mobility, and it's definitely not going to be a quadruped floating up there in the air for 100 years. It is mobile enough and tanky enough to combine the best parts of keeping you alive while still letting you deal big damage and have fun. The other 2 missions, though, that we're going to be approaching after the Strider are Operation Wall Climber, ending in the Juggernaut boss fight, and then finally we'll end up on Attack the Watchpoint, which is the mission that has both Sula, the other Armored Core, which is a big pain point for a lot of people, and ends in Balteus, the PCA autonomous missile launcher from hell. The reason, like I mentioned, that we're using these missions specifically is because they are where the difficulty ramps up in the first chapter of the game, and they're going to make a lot of people turn it off. They do have some really big difficulty spikes, and those things, from what I've been hearing at least, are making a lot of people quit the game, or at least spend a lot of time doing something that might be a little bit easier. Armored Core 6 is ultimately a game that requires that you do at least some adaptation with your build depending on what you're going into. You're gonna lose missions, you're going to get smacked by bosses, things are gonna be hard, but ultimately you don't have a mechanic for which you can go out and grind up a whole bunch of XP and come back bigger leveled with a bigger stick to beat the boss faster. You're going to actually have to work for it in terms of mechanics. You're going to have to be decent at movement, you're going to have to be good with your build, and there are small adjustments that you can make to your build to better fight against specific bosses and specific enemies. That being said, I want to introduce this build mainly because it has been carrying me through the story beyond Chapter 1 and in the beginning by giving me a lot of HP, by keeping things very simple in terms of damage, keeping my stagger options very, very high, and giving me a very flashy melee stick at the end of the day. You'll notice right off the bat that this build is using the Coquillettes handguns. There are 2 of them actually, and that is because these handguns boast a rifle's amount of firepower, at least in damage, as well as the same amount of stagger you can get from some of the bigger early game rifles, which is really impressive because these don't add a whole bunch of weight. They are relatively low ammo compared to something like a rifle, but the fact that you can get very close, unload them very fast into your target, and build up a stagger really quick means that you can unload on those bigger boss enemies, or like the tetrapod here, you can get the big melee weapon out to land the big melee hit. One thing about this build I will concede is that the pile bunker does not become available as a weapon until you finish Chapter 1. So that is a bit of a caveat. The good news is that this is 100% interchangeable with the second early laser blade that you're going to get in the beginning of the game. That blade is going to allow you to, you're either going to use a single hit or you're going to charge for 2 very big hits, and they build up stagger incredibly fast. The reason that that blade will be so important is because building stagger on Balteus is very easy to do because the charge window for the laser blade is pretty quick. You can hit Balteus with 2 swings of the laser blade and still have enough time to dodge the missiles that are coming at you after you have landed that assault boost in. Now, this is obviously getting a bit ahead of myself, but I do want to mention, more importantly here, that both the pulse blade and the laser blade are very similar. But the pulse blade is the default melee weapon that you're going to get. The laser blade is the second energy sword that you will unlock, so make sure that you don't get the 2 confused. Now that you've got your handguns and your laser blade figured out, you'll want to move on to your final weapon, which is your shoulder-mounted missile launcher. These come in a variety of different trajectories, but you'll want to start with the vertical missile launcher for the most impact. This is a very strong option. It's an 8 missile launcher that will track your target as long as you're keeping your reticle on them, and they do rain down from the top, making them more difficult to dodge than missiles coming straight at you.
You must be Raven. One of the infamous handler Walter's hounds. Interesting. You ready to climb the wall?
Now, after the heavy combat helicopter, the first real boss that you'll take on in Chapter 1 is the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut is a heavy weapons platform with a completely invulnerable front face, and the first half of this fight is incredibly easy because you've got yourself a big magnet for all of his guns in the form of V4 Rusty. Rusty's just going to take the center stage, distract the Juggernaut all the way up until you get it down to 50% health, and then he is going to peace out and leave you to die. At least that's what it seems like. But the Juggernaut ultimately is not a very difficult boss as long as you can get into his sweet spots, which are underneath his left and right side or completely behind him. The other good thing happening with this build and the vertical missiles is that those missiles will build up small amounts of stagger on top of the Juggernaut because the top portion of him is not protected. Now, you may have noticed that I do have 2 main hand weapons on my left side. This is on purpose. This isn't modding, this isn't hacking, there's nothing like that going on. If you're new to the game, there are things that you can do with your AC called OS tuning, and you'll get chips through the arena mode in which you'll fight other ACs. Once you get a couple OS tuning chips, you'll use those to unlock different things, different passive abilities for your armored core. The first one that I picked up is the ability to equip main hand weapons to a shoulder slot. So the reason I can use my pile bunker on my left hand shoulder slot and swap it with the handgun that I have in my left hand is because I picked up that chip after just 2 Armored Core Arena fights. So you'll win against those first 2 very easy ACs and pick up this very incredibly, super ridiculously overpowered, good feeling OS ability, your passive ability, basically. From that point, you'll be able to swap out using your shoulder button, your handgun, and your melee weapon. And that, in and of itself, is an invaluable tool, but you do need to remember that this has to have a free and open space in order to activate. So if you are firing your left-hand weapon, you will not be able to swap to your left-hand back weapon. Sounds kind of clunky, it's a FromSoft thing, it does happen, makes things a little bit difficult in heightened situations, but I wouldn't worry too much about it, you'll get the hang of it eventually. In addition to that, if you find yourself taking the Assault Armor OS tuning instead, or picking that up as well, depending on how many chips that you have, the Assault Armor is basically a front-loaded stun button for every boss. You can get if not a complete stagger bar, a very, very big portion of stagger from the Assault Armor activation. That is the big energy field that you saw at the end of the Juggernaut fight there. That is going to basically knock out all of the projectiles coming at you in that area, and it is going to deal damage as well as a huge amount of stagger to the boss or the enemy that is right on top of you. It a lot of times seems like it's built to be a get out of jail free card, but you can use it offensively as well, just like your assault boost kick, to do some really crazy aggressive stuff and make those boss windows much bigger for much bigger damage. So we're on to Attack the Watch Point, the mission Attack the Watch Point. They've already cleared out the first section. We've got one more section of small enemies and large cannons to take out before we're going to meet up with Sula. So let's talk about the generator and the boosters for this AC. Ultimately, what you'll want to be doing is focusing on a generator that can give you a large output, and then boosters that aren't going to eat a ton of energy for your quick boost. The unfortunate part of that whole equation is that sometimes that's very hard to find, and sometimes that can get pretty expensive. You may need to replay missions in order to build up some money, but if you want new parts and you don't have the money for them, what's the harm in going back and making more money and practicing with your build even more on missions that you've already done? Maybe you got by Operation Wall Climber with just 10% health, but you go back and do it a second time, clear it with 50% health, and you've got that same chunk of money sitting in your pocket, ready to go.
The target's inside. Make your way in.
Attacking a watch point. You're incorrigible, Handler Walter. How many of your dogs must I kill before you learn?
What's that?
This is the first part of Attack the Watch Point that is going to be actually very difficult. If you came into this mission with the idea that you were going to creep in those first 2 sectors and take out all of the enemies rather easily without taking any damage, this part still may be a challenge for you. Sula is an insanely mobile AC, but he is bipedal and he is, I would say, midweight. He may actually even be lightweight. The good news is that when you have a melee weapon in hand, if you can get him to 90% stagger and then pop him to 100% and charge up your melee weapon immediately after, you're going to hit him for tons and tons of damage. He does have repair kits just like you do, so he will get health back, but ultimately he can be worn down very fast. Now, Sula does attack you with the assault boost kick. he can build up stagger on you quite fast as well. His energy weapons are relatively difficult to dodge. His missiles and his rifle. He does have a grenade launcher on top of everything else, so if he really wants to lay down the stagger on you, you have to dodge it in order not to just stand still in front of him. The other problem with Zula is that he is very, very dodgy. He is going to make it a problem, just like that, to get hit by certain melee weapons, which is another reason the laser blade is going to be your friend for this fight. The pile bunker that we're using right now does big damage, but the hitbox is much, much smaller. So if you are using the laser blade, that will earn you tons of traction against that enemy. Zula is a very difficult enemy, but it only took one try with this build, and going into the Balteus fight, there is a resupply, getting us all of our repair kits back, all of our ammo back. Everything is going to turn up aces, just in time for us to get our teeth kicked in by the big bad himself. The biggest, baddest filter of Chapter 1, and this fight is in no way easy. Nothing about this fight, at least on your first time through the game, will be simple. You'll need to do it quite a few times, so don't get disappointed if you can't crack it right away. Sometimes it just takes a lot of learning to get those patterns down, to understand what the boss does, and figure out what your windows are to attack him.
Disabling autopilot. Establishing comms link with him.
Raven. I've identified an approaching enemy. I'll synchronize with your brainwaves and maintain contact to support you.
Now, when I am saying that this boss is the filter, this boss is going to make people quit this game forever, it's true. The difficulty is extreme. The fact that it only took me 5 attempts going back through with this build to show you all how it works is honestly a pretty feels-good moment for me, because that means that I learned quite a bit through my first 20 attempts to kill him with my base AC, with the laser blade, and much less to do. So, essentially, the heavy build that you can go into this fight with gives you a lot of AP in order to take those goofy stray hits from his grenade launcher, to tank a lot of the missiles that are getting thrown your way that are undodgeable, and gives you a lot of room to get up in his face with the handguns and your laser blade or your pile bunker, your melee weapon as it is. The other unfortunate part of this build is that it does not have a whole lot of vertical thrust because of the generator and the boosters that we are using. Since we're heavy, we're mostly ground-based, we don't get a whole lot of airtime, which is going to be a bigger problem in Chapter 2, but we'll talk about that in another video. As it stands right now, Balteus is angry. He's going to take a number of tries, but we have enough health and we have enough stagger to really get in front of him and shut him down. The mechanic that Balteus comes in with that is most frustrating for me is his pulse armor. The big shield that he lights up around him, it's the blue bar above his health, and in order to deal actual damage, you have to deplete that shield first. The good news is when you take that shield off, he goes into stagger. So you have full opportunity with which to hit him with your fully charged melee weapon. Also, there are a number of opportunities when you are playing against Balteus that you can assault boost directly into his face, charge your melee weapon to full capacity, and then boost away backwards to the left or to the right to avoid all of the missiles doing their 180-degree tracking on you. All of my repair kits are down, we run up in his face with the assault boost, and we don't have time to drop the pile bunker. So we're just going to restart. There was no way I was going to survive with that amount of health, and I can show you the opening window to get these melee hits on him. He does always fire those missiles at the very beginning of the fight, so you can dash in with your assault boost, rip a fully charged laser blade on him, get a big chunk of health off of that pulse armor, and then start your dodging. You do want to stay close to him. You got to keep him in your sights as long as possible. Your handguns are very short range. The long range weapon that you'll have to kind of hold him down is going to be your missiles. You can do either straight missiles like we've got right now, or you can do vertical missiles. The reason that we're using the straight missiles right now is because these ones have a bigger amount of stagger, and the vertical missiles also only have 8, whereas this one I believe has 10. So we launch 10 missiles at him, we get more stagger on him, we can deal more damage to his shields from far away, and keep him honest. As long as he's in close range, that means that the handguns are doing their job, nailing down his pulse shield and building up that stagger bar. We've only had to use 1 repair kit to keep things pretty healthy. Unfortunately, getting hit by all of his melee attacks isn't a good thing, but dodging all of that is very easy if you can get close enough to him to dodge through his swings. Sadly, this build is not built for vertical movement, but it is built to get those assault boosts nice and close to him, so we get an easy, fully charged melee punch directly in his face while he's sitting there ready to take the damage. You can watch the stagger bar build so fast when you are using the dual handguns, and it is incredibly rewarding to know that even if you are sitting there stunned, the boss is definitely very close to being stunned themselves. This, however, is the reason that I don't like the pulse armor as a mechanic for Volteus. He not randomly, it's probably on a timer that it recharges, but ultimately it feels random when he gets the pulse armor back because the timer went off and you were just about to stagger him. The good news is he's pretty squishy if you can get him with enough melee hits. Dodging the grenade launcher as well is also pretty simple if you're making the connection between the audio cue and the timing to dodge. And down he goes. Like I said, 5 attempts this go around. I'm not going to show you all the failures because I think that seems a little bit excessive, but those handguns are absolutely worth their weight in gold, as well as the laser blade, which is technically a pile bunker right now, I know. But that is it for this build, guys. I'll be back next week. I have a wheelchair shotgun build that is super fun that I am ready to share. But until then, I will see you guys next time. Peace out.
You need rest. But first, a warning.